So today what I want to do is a little tutorial on how to use Polytab. Now I've been using this product for a little bit, mainly on a lot of my smaller works just to experiment, but I also have been using it on Mural. And Polytab, or other names they call it, parachute cloth or mural cloth, I believe it originated in Philadelphia, but a lot of artists are starting to use that now because you're able to actually shorten up the process in terms of how you install a mural. So you're able to actually paint on this cloth and then attach it to the wall like wallpaper. So that is something that is really new, really unique for me in my practice, and helps me out a lot. So I've been doing it a lot on my indoor murals, and you can do it on outdoor murals as well. So that is what we're going to do today. So let's get started. So to use Polytab, all you need are 4 different things. The first thing that you need is the actual Polytab. I will have in the descriptions the website where I get my Polytab. I get it by the yard. I get about 50 yards and it's about 60 inches wide, so it comes in a really large roll. The second and third thing that you need is matte medium and gesso. To turn this into a canvas that we can actually paint on, we have to gesso the Polytab. So that is where the matte medium and the gesso comes in. Usually I will put a 50-50 mixture so that the gesso easy to pour around and actually push around when you're trying to gesso the Polytab. And this is one of the things that you can see me do now. I lay down a tarp or a piece of plastic on the floor and roll out that Polytab however much I need to. I do a lot more than what I need to just to make sure I'm getting enough Polytab primed. But I roll that out on a tarp or plastic, and then I basically use a roller to actually just push around the gesso matte medium mixture on the canvas. Like I said, you want to do this with a plastic or tarp underneath because some of that gesso does seep through the Polytab and gets on the surface of whatever you're laying that Polytab on. And usually it takes about, I would say, 2 hours to, maybe a day to fully dry. So I do this the last thing at night, and then I come back in the morning time the next day when I get back to my studio and actually lift the Polytab from that tarp or plastic. So once you let it fully dry, then you have a primed Polytab canvas to actually paint on. So that is how easy it is to get that raw Polytab material into your studio and prime it and have it ready for you to paint whatever design you want. So for the mural that I was working on when preparing this Polytab, I basically left it on the floor and did the background of the sort of the base layer of the figure that I wanted to paint on this mural. And once I had it primed, you can see here, well, that is when I go in and actually do the actual painting that I want to have attached to this space in the jazz club. So this took about 3 days to actually paint because I took my time, I worked throughout the day. I didn't have to actually be in the actual location where the mural is to actually paint that figure. And that is one of the powerful things about Polytab or a parachute cloth or mural cloth. The process is that you don't have to be in the location where the mural is going to be installed to actually work on the mural. And once the figure that I want to paint on the Polytab is done, right here I painted Ron Miles. He's a jazz artist, passed away in 2022, and the jazz club really wants to have a tribute to Ron Miles, the musician, composer. So that's who I'm painting here. I actually don't have to take the entire Polytab material. I can just cut out the figure of Ron Miles and take that with me. So that's what I did. So I just went around with the X-Acto knife and cut around the edges of Ron Miles, basically making a die cut of the actual figure. And because I had multiple Polytab pieces hung up because the mural figure was too large to have it on one piece, I basically made sure I used the X-Acto knife to die cut around that entire figure on both of those pieces. So in the end, I created 2 different Polytab pieces for this one figure in one sort of paint session for that week. So all I have to do now is just roll it up and arrive at the mural install site and install it on top of the background that I already did for that mural site. Now, the fourth thing that you need to actually install Polytab is gel medium. Because I used a flat sheen or a flat finish with the rest of that mural on the wall that I painted in the jazz club, I'm using a matte gel medium for this. I wanted to make sure that finish matched the finish of the actual background that I did already. All I have to do now is tape up that Polytab die cut piece that I did of Ron Miles. Once I have the larger area of Ron Miles fixed on the wall, I then unwrap the other Polytab as well and start to align it with the larger piece and then make sure that is taped down. And one note that I did during this installation is that I had 2 large pieces of Polytab, but once I had it on the wall, I thought it was a little bit too large to do it in 2 goes. So I actually, once it was taped and aligned, I actually cut up the Polytab even further. So I cut around the neck area and then I cut around the coat area, just making sure that is a lot more manageable. And now the way I apply the gel medium is that once everything is aligned and in its place, I then take off the tape at the bottom of the Polytab figure and I lift it up and I apply that gel medium. I'm very liberal with the actual amount that I'm using, so I'm just trying to get as much on there as possible, really thick. I'm using a roller and I'm just getting in the back on the wall and I'm just trying to get as high as I can. And once I get as much gel medium on the wall as I need, I then let go of that Polytab and lay it flat and then use a spatula or something really flat to actually sort of scrape along that Polytab material, trying to make sure everything is adhering to the wall. So now I'm just working my way through each of those different pieces of Polytab that I taped to the wall. I'm just going from the bottom, adding as much of that gel medium as I can, and then transitioning to the top, taking off the tape and adding that gel medium to the top of that chunk of Polytab area that I'm working on, and then flattening those areas and then using that spatula or a trowel to sort of smooth it out as much as I can. And I do this process, pretty much for every piece of that Polytab that I want on that wall. If I encounter any areas that have a bubble, because sometimes that may happen with a large chunk of Polytab, you may miss getting an area with the gel medium and then a bubble is created. All I do is use an X-Acto knife to cut an X right over that bubble, lift up those different areas and add gel medium, and then basically smooth that area back out. And you cannot see the lines that I cut in to actually get to the back of it. Once everything is dry, I then come back the next day and start working on this piece even more. It was gonna take me probably another 4 hours to add the coat and everything else to it. All I'm doing is going back and making sure that all the edges are clean, that it's seamless, going from the actual Polytab piece that I painted to the background. So I'm going back and forth. I didn't have to do that a lot, but for the most part, everything looked really seamless. But I really enjoyed, this process and wanted to share exactly how I went going about it, because not a lot of artists do it, and I think a lot of artists can benefit from the idea of, painting something in your studio and then being able to attach it to the wall. And what I hear is that it's very permanent in terms of the actual sort of